Good evening, everyone. Good evening. If you can hear us, go ahead and put a 1 in the chat. We want to make sure that our audio is clear. Go ahead and put a 1 in the chat. We just want to make sure that you can hear us. I think we're good on the audio because we did some testing before we came on. But welcome to tonight's broadcast. This is installment number 8, I believe. Please don't quote me on that because all my days are running together. So, when you're on different timelines, it's kind of hard to keep track from one to the other, right? It's just that way. But welcome to tonight's installment of the Woes of Babylon as we discuss real issues that people are going through. Have a little bit of an interesting topic for you all this evening, but before we get started in the discussion, I just want to remind everyone that you are entering into a call this is a trust relationship, right? So you are solely responsible for any information that you receive while on this call, and you're responsible for how you choose to take and utilize the information that you receive. All right. Now, tonight's discussion is going to be centered around invisible contracts, right? What does that look like? How do we know when we're entering into a contract that we can't see or we can't read or there's no full disclosure? And that is happening a lot. It really is happening a lot, right? So let me ask this first question before we even get started. I want you all to put a number in the chat for me. If you can think off of the top of your head, how many contracts do you think, just a rough estimate, how many contracts do you think you've signed in your lifetime? Just right off the top of your head. How many contracts do you think you've signed in your lifetime? Right? And so you can just go ahead and put it in the chat. When people think about contracts, they think about car loans, they think about mortgages, they think about credit cards, bank accounts, they think about the cell phone bill. They may even think about like a rental or a lease agreement or something like that, right? But there is one contract in particular that a lot of people do not realize that they are in, because they don't look at it as a contract. They look at it as something else, right? And primarily they look at it that way is because it's not something specifically that they signed or negotiated, and it's not something that you were never shown this contract. So you may not know it's a contract, but just oblige me and just put a number in the chat. I just want to see what people are saying. Okay, so let's see. All right, so, oh my goodness, someone says around 40. And you know what? That sounds about right. Because when you think back to the legal age of 18, many people entered into contracts after the legal age of 18. And actually, it's even really before that, because many people get their working papers when they're teenagers, like young teenagers. I remember my first job was working at City Hall. I was 13, working as a file clerk at City Hall. 13, right? So it goes beyond even the legal, quote unquote, what they deem to be legal, the legal age of 18. Right? But okay, so that's the first question. So someone says that they've entered into at least 40 contracts in their lifetime. And when you think about it, that's a lot of contracts, right? But this one contract in particular that we want to talk about tonight, it determines what property you really own. It determines what authority can tax you or what authority can regulate you. It literally determines how you live, right, and what jurisdiction that you're in. So what contract do you all think I'm talking about? You can just go ahead and put it in the chat. Go ahead and put it in the chat. This is a contract that you have never signed, you have not negotiated, and you were never shown this contract, visibly with your eyes, right? You don't have a tangible document in your hand that states that you're actually in a contract. You understand what I'm saying? What do you all think that contract is? and you can just put it in the chat. So while you're doing that, again, for those of you that are joining us on TikTok, welcome, welcome. For those that are watching on YouTube, welcome, welcome. Tonight we're talking about invisible contracts. So the first question again, and I'll repeat it for the new people that just came into the room on TikTok. How many contracts do you think that you've signed in your lifetime? And aside from that, what is the biggest contract that you are currently subject to where you haven't signed anything, you haven't negotiated anything, and you were never shown anything that states that you are part of this contract? So the topic for tonight, again, is invisible contracts. That's what we are discussing. And I just wanted to set the tone and set the room for the discussion. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mikael. And it's just going to be a casual conversation this evening. It's nothing formal because we just want to bring certain things out to you all. Mikael, are you there? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Thank you, Nadiva.
Yes, you're welcome. You're welcome. So I'm still waiting for people to answer about this other question, right? A lot of people answered first question, but they didn't answer the second question. Why do you think people can't think of what this other contract is? Can you hear me, Mikael?
All right. Oh, was that towards me, or I was looking
Yes.
at the chat? I think somebody answered the question in the chat.
Okay. So for those listeners out there on TikTok, and I'll ask the question again, what is the contract, one of the biggest contracts of your lifetime that you don't realize that you're in? And Mikael, why do you think it could potentially be difficult for people to answer that question?
Basically, for one, they don't understand how a contract can be one-sided without their signature. And a lot of contracts don't actually necessarily require a signature. And so if you didn't sign something, you don't believe that there's a contract or that a contract even exists. And that places you in a position where someone is taking advantage of you, and you're wondering why, and you don't know what happened, how you got in this position, because of those invisible contracts that you're not aware of. The invisible contracts are much more detrimental to us than the contracts that we can see, that we can sign. Now, all these contracts, whether they're invisible or whether you sign some form or some document or an agreement, they're all structured to benefit someone else and not you. So that's going to be important for us to really go back and kind of look at what a contract really is. I'm sure we have our own definition of what a contract, really is. But tonight we really want to kind of look at that as well, and kind of work our way from there, because there's different angles that we want to look at, these contracts. One thing for sure is that you got to know who you are and who you are not, because based on who commerce says you are, there exist these invisible contracts. There exist contracts that you also sign for as well. But these contracts, as I said before, are structured to benefit another entity and not you. So somewhere along the way, by not realizing that there was an invisible contract on the table, your silence actually was like your signature on these invisible contracts. Well, how do you know the contract exists if there was not full disclosure, if there was not disclosure to let you know that this contract was on the table? So many contracts are right in front of us and we don't realize it. Before we came, or right after we came into this world, the contracts began.
Immediately.
And yes, and if you are 2 days old, you don't even realize a contract has been already established, an invisible contract. You don't even know that. And you don't realize any other contract until you reach your teens, until you decide to get a driver's license, and then you start utilizing that driver's license and not even realizing that the driver's license is also a contract. So that may be the first contract that you've ever been exposed to. Maybe you got a job at 14, 15 years old and didn't realize there's a contract on the table. You know, so these contracts, invisible contracts, they were created after your birth. And as you move forward in life, more and more contracts continue to pile on. Now, I would say that I'm definitely well over, 150 contracts since my teens up until now, because, you don't realize how many contracts you're entering into, not just the invisible contracts, the contracts where you got to give them a signature that states that you are still incompetent. So whether you're signing a contract or you're not, you're still incompetent. And that's where this system wants you to remain in that position. David, did you want to add anything to that?
So going back to the question, and someone in the comment section of the call, they essentially hit it dead on, right? So the question is what is the biggest contract that you would have entered into in your lifetime where no one signed, you didn't sign, you didn't negotiate it, and it's nothing that you would have shown, there's nothing that you would have been shown where you would have known that this was some sort of a contract, right? And so somebody put in the chat, they put the birth certificate and the social security system, and that it was not disclosed. And that is absolutely 100% correct.
Yes.
The birth certificate and the social security system ties into the biggest master contract of your life. Okay? What is the biggest master contract of your life? It is that citizenship. It is an adhesion contract. Okay? It's not just used to define a nationality or an identity. No. It's a status that's tied to an invisible contract. And in law, your status always comes before your rights. Every single time. All right. So, most people are taught that citizenship is a gift. This is why you have, well, I don't know how that's looking right now with people kicking down the door to get into the States. But back in the day, they would always try to sell this, come to America, come to America. Streets are what did they call it? The land of milk and honey. And people actually used to think that the streets over here were paved with gold, right? And so people were fleeing their countries, trying to come over to America to try to be a part of the American dream and become United States citizens. But what they did not realize is that when they did that, they were entered into an adhesion contract where their rights would essentially be forever changed, right? And there were certain things that they were given up in exchange for a perceived benefit that can be given and then it can be taken away, right? And so in different areas of your life, we have a basic understanding that if you don't read a contract, how they say, always read the fine print. So if you don't read the fine print of that contract, it doesn't matter if you read it or not. You're still going to be bound because you signed it, right? And if you accept the benefits, then your consent to that contract is presumed, right? So a lot of people are out here still trying to assert that they're not a United States citizen, but they have accepted the benefit and the protections underneath the United States Code. Their laws, their codes, and their statutes. So if you're asserting that you should be protected under the benefits of their law, then there's a presumption on the table that you are a United States citizen that is subject to an invisible contract that you didn't even know exists. Right?
If I could add to what you just said.
Yes.
Because something happened that had to lead up to this invisible contract. And that's, I want to make sure everybody understands this. The invisible contract could be considered a secondary contract to the initial contract. So let me kind of explain to you what that means. First, we want to understand what a contract is. It's a legally enforceable agreement between two or more parties. What has to be in that contract? An offer, an acceptance, consideration, some type of value exchanged, mutual consent, and have the capacity to contract. Now, don't get me wrong. These contracts are, like I said, one-sided. They have hidden clauses, presumptions, all type of legalities that take advantage of the other party. So there has to be a contract that led to the invisible contract, which is the birth certificate. And what was that? That was between vital statistics and another party, which would have been the mother of the property, which was you. They had to sign a contract in order to create this invisible contract, which is the birth certificate. So there was first a contract with the mother that led to an invisible contract over you. You are the property. So yes, there was a contract that came before with the mother and vital statistics, or the state, that allowed them to now establish or create the invisible contract over this entity, this baby, if you will. And now here we are, not realizing that an invisible contract is out there on each and every one of us, and we had no clue. We didn't have any say-so in the initial contract between the mother, not the father, between the mother and the state. Mm-hmm. So because of that contract, it leads to this contract, an invisible contract. The first contract just gave them the authority, the permission to create the invisible contract. So I just want to really point that out, that we want to ask, where did this come from? What happened before that? Well, let's go start right there at that contract with the mother and the state. That allowed them to do everything else that they've done from that point on up until now. They've been able to create these invisible contracts, and they said it worked so well, we're going to continue to do it over and over and over again, as many times as we possibly can. So I just want to mention that as well, because that's part of it as well. And we just can't forget that initial contract with the mother and the state.
That's right. That's right. Now here's the thing, and I'm glad you brought that up about the elements, right? What are the elements of the invisible contract? Okay, Mikhail spoke about the offer, acceptance, and consideration. Now, when you look at the citizenship, you have to be able to identify that the citizenship has all three elements of the contract. It has the offer, the acceptance, and the consideration. Okay, so what do you all think the offer is? And I sort of kind of gave it away not too long ago. List one offer in the comment section on whatever platform you're watching from. List one of the elements, list one of the things that you can deem as an offer as a part of the invisible contract connected to the citizenship. What do you think? Drop it in the chat for me. And then we're going to talk about the other two elements. Put it in the chat. What do you think? What is one thing that you can look at that's an offer? Okay, so someone said perceived rights. Okay. What else? And that's a good one, because perceived rights, that falls under privilege to a certain degree. Those benefits that we were talking about earlier that can be given and taken away, right? Perceived rights. Okay, someone else says privileges. Both good answers, and you're absolutely correct. The offer is, we will protect you. We will give you benefits, and we will give you privileges, and we will give you recognition of a nationality or an identity or a status that you can call your own. And this is especially very inviting to those who are having issues in other countries. This is one of the reasons why they come over here. They come over here because they think that they're going to have some sort of protection. And although we know the world has changed significantly since that was the case, right? Right now, a lot of people are dealing with a whole bunch of stuff out there. All right. So they give you the illusion of protection and privileges and recognition and identity. All right. So that's the offer. That's the offer. That's the first element of a contract. All right. What is the consideration of that invisible contract? What you think? What does everyone think? What would be the consideration? Because remember, you accepted the offer, but where is the consideration? What do you think is the consideration? Just put it in the chat. Because we need people to know and understand what's actually happening. We enter into invisible contracts almost every single day. And it doesn't matter if those contracts are written or not. They're there. They're invisible for a reason. And this is why someone can be placed in a presumption under a presumptive authority when they're trying to, let's say, fight a court case or whatever. There's always some sort of legal presumption on the record that needs to be rebutted. There are legal presumptions all over the place, and this is why they can do what they want, right? So what do you all think is consideration? Okay, someone says the use of FRNs. Okay. All right, so let's take it up a notch. Consideration, that means that now, this means that you have to give them something. This is the consideration. You have to give them something. This is your consideration for their offer. So it says them being able to use our BC and commerce in exchange for in exchange for these rights. Okay, that's a good one. Okay, so your consideration is compliance, right? Because you got to follow the rules, right? You got to follow their laws, their laws, their codes, and their statutes. You have to follow. There's a consideration of taxation. You're going to be taxed. That's a big one because you're literally being taxed to death. Someone says future labor. Yes, that is also another consideration. All right. And the jurisdiction. That's another consideration. Now here's where it gets interesting. What is the acceptance? Because remember, the contract has to have all three elements: offer, consideration, and acceptance. What is your acceptance of this contract? Think about it. Think about it. I want y'all to think about this one real hard. What is your acceptance? Okay, someone says citizenship. Well, that's the contract. The citizenship is the contract. But how are you accepting the contract? Okay, someone says the signature. Okay, the signature is something that you may do during the course of your acceptance, but what is the actual acceptance of the contract? Okay, someone says acquiescence. Okay, well, yeah, there is an element of acquiescence there if there's no rebuttal. Absolutely, yeah. It's silence is acquiescence, so yeah, there's definitely acquiescence there. Y'all want me to tell you? I can tell you. Okay, someone says to be bound by their statutes. Okay, so yeah, that's a form of consideration. Okay, I'll just tell you, and when I say it, y'all gonna be like, oh man, I didn't even think of that. The acceptance does not occur by signature alone. It occurs by registration. Your registration is the acceptance. Okay? There's the birth registration. There's the Social Security enrollment. There's the registration of your house, the registration of your car. There is a pledging of assets on the record. Yeah, the registration is the acceptance. You are agreeing to their contract, their consideration, their benefits by literally pledging your property over by way of the registration process, right? So when you place your assets on registration, you are automatically accepting the terms of their offer. Hello? Boom. I bet y'all didn't think about that one, did you? Mikhail, did you want to add anything to that?
No, that right there is should be an eye opener for everyone on the call when you think about the fact that you are going to confirm this contract agreement, this citizenship contract by going through the process and registering in their system in a way where they are now able to leverage all your assets, anything that you create, which is an asset, because a contract is an asset, a contract is a security, and here we start moving in this direction, and there's no one out there to explain to you how to maneuver.
Right.
What you're doing right as opposed to what you're doing wrong. Yeah. There is no one. And you're just following along from one generation to the next generation, making the same mistakes that the previous generation did. And you never realize until you reach 40, 50, 60 years old that that is the problem that you've been having all along.
Yep.
And now you're trying to figure out how to get out of this situation or scenario. This citizenship is not what you thought it was.
Right. Somebody said registration to vote. That's a big one.
That's correct as well.
That's a big one. And see, here's the thing too. Those elements that we just named, the registration, that is a form of affirmative conduct as it relates to contracts, right? And so your conduct as it relates to your acceptance of the offer is just as binding as if you signed your signature. Do you know how powerful that is? And so when someone sits up there in court and they say, or, you know, they get pulled over by a police officer and they say, well, you don't have any jurisdiction over me. Their conduct creates in other areas of their life, right? Because think about it. They're pulled over on the side of the road by a police officer and they're saying one thing, but in all the other areas of their life, they're conducting affirmative actions that accept the offer of the invisible contract. This is deep. And they have agreed to accept the benefits. You see how this is, you see how this is like just understand how this thing works. So the system, to a certain degree, yes, a lot of people are deceived, but the system really doesn't need to deceive you because the system survives based on legal presumption. All right, because you were never told what jurisdiction are you entering, what privileges are you getting, right? That your ownership of assets are conditional and how the courts gain authority over you. You're not told these things. It's not illegal to not tell you. And it's not required once consent is presumed by way of your affirmative conduct, right? So by accepting the citizenship status, you agree to live how they want you to live. You accepted the offer. You're registering your assets. There's consideration present. There's present consideration. So the question is how do you get out of this? Let me ask you all a question. Has everybody picked up the book? Has everybody started reading the book? They own it all, including you, by way of a toxic currency. That was one of the recommendations that we made for people to read, like probably a month and a half ago. Since we started doing these calls, I think we mentioned it on the first call and told people to pick up those books. How many of you have actually picked up the book and you started reading it? Let's put a one in the chat if you have, because this is a it's a web, and you have to sort of kind of know how to get out of the web. Everything is interconnected. You have these invisible contracts that are connected to the use of the FRN, that's connected to the use of your credit. It's all interconnected. She said, "Yep, it's sitting right here on my table." Yeah, that book is yes, it's you got to read that book.
Very eye-opening. Yeah.
It's
And you know, it's sad that we have to go through so much in life before we get to that point where we say, listen, I need to sit down and I'm going to read this book.
right.
You know, if you're 18, 19 years old and I say, hey, read this book, you're not going to read it. You're not going to read that book until you start to face life and go through some things and you realize, hey, this is not what I thought it was. Things don't add up. It's not making sense. Why is this happening to me? And I hear young people say, well, it's not fair. It's not fair. You know, and of course, everybody responds the same way. How is that? Life's not fair. You hear that for years. People say that. Life's not fair. But when you are young, you know, adult, technically an adult at 18, and someone says, read this book, 9 times out of 10, 18-year-olds, they won't read that book. They won't. That's why it's important to reach the youth at an early age before they get to that point, before they feel like, oh, I know what I know enough. I'm just going out on my own. But then what happens? You get to a point where you have lived enough life where you know something ain't right and you know I got to figure some things out. Now you're ready to read because you know if I don't do something different, my situation is not going to change. Mm-hmm. My life is going to get worse. And so when someone comes to you and says, hey, are you familiar with the invisible contracts? And I'm talking to someone that's 35, 40 years old. They're like, what are you talking about? Invisible contracts? I never heard that before. It doesn't even make sense. No, I don't talk about invisible contracts. What about the contracts I can see? You know, it's the invisible contracts that's worse than the contracts that you can see. You know, I used to tell people, it's not about what you know, it's about what you don't know, about what you can't see. And so sharing that book with people has opened their eyes to say, oh my goodness, now I can see some things. I understand a little bit better than I did before. Now they're in a position where they are ready to learn. They are ready to hear whatever it is you have to share with them. And so we have to deal with those groups, those who are ready to hear, who have lived life, and then, of course, the youth who are not already set in their ways and thinking, oh, I know enough. I'm not ready to read. 18-year-old really doesn't have the patience to sit down and read a book a lot of times. Now, I'm not saying all 18-year-olds, but the majority of 18-year-olds, they want to get out here and see what life is all about, you know. And now they don't have time to read a book. They got to see what life is all about, you know. So I look at these two different age groups, the youth, the younger youth, and then the adults who have lived enough life to know that this is not right. This is not how I thought life was supposed to be. I'm talking to people like that right now. You know, all they do is go to work, come home, pay bills, go to work, come home, pay bills, and it just continues. That cycle continues to go. And they're now open to hear something that says, hey, I have information over here that if I share this information with you, it can change your situation or your scenario, because they're getting to that point where they're tired and they're fed up with the scenario that they're living, and they thought it was going to be different than this. And they also have children, and they've been trying to maintain, and now they can't maintain, and everything is piling up. And they've been off the job, the job, which in Hebrew means persecution, for 8, 9, 10 months, can't find a job, and now they don't know what they're going to do. They really don't know what they're going to do. They don't have a clue what the next step is. And majority of people out here today are right there in that place. And they're looking for help. Now they are. You know, talked to them 2 years ago, they're not looking for no help. They're good. They're really good. Got a good check coming in. I can take care of this, take care of that. But they are missing the entire system that's been built around them and is benefiting off of their value. Now they may want to hear what it is you have to say to them. You know, these contracts, they're out there. They've been out there. You're not benefiting from these contracts like you should. Nadina?
That's right. That is absolutely right. See, when you enter into these invisible contracts, really, you agree to a waiver of the original jurisdiction that you're actually supposed to be in. And so you enter into a fictional jurisdiction that is governed and organized and managed by them. You know, and so the citizenship often displaces the inherent, or, you know, what people would call the natural, private, or private type scenario. All right, because that fictional jurisdiction is going to try to come in and supersede any other authority or inherent rights. And, you know, in their eyes, there is no inherent rights. And so what they've done is they've created civil rights. And, you know, civil rights can be given and taken away. This is why they have laws on the books governing civil rights. But your rights supersede any rights that they can give you or take you away, because your rights are inherent, given to you by the Most High in Genesis 1. Right? So we have to know what jurisdiction we're in, and you have to know in your paperwork how to go in and make the proper rebuttals in terms of the jurisdiction or the territory or any other legal presumptions that they could potentially use against you to steal from you. Right? Now, their statutes can be modified, they can be suspended, or they can be conditioned just by, like, you know, an act of Congress or an executive order, whatever the case may be. But those inherent rights that are given to you by the Most High is not something that they can take away if you know how to structure your paperwork properly. All right, and this is the key, and this is why we're dealing with the status, because that citizenship, there's a lot of restrictions on that citizenship that's keeping people from being able to do what they really need and want to do. And so there are certain things that pop up as a result of that citizenship that people don't know how to maneuver, because they don't realize that there's an invisible contract on their head. And there's legal presumptions. There's legal presumptions that they have to deal with. And many people don't know that citizenship creates a lien. And so when you're trying to do certain stuff, you are essentially barred from certain activities. So you gotta, you know, think about how do I get out of this? And so that book that we recommended is going to give you all the foundation that you need, but it doesn't tell you how to fix it. And it does not tell you how to fix it. It just doesn't. And that's when you want to align yourself with people that know, that can tell you or show you or teach you and educate you on how to fix the problem. Because that book is not going to tell you how to fix it. It has some stuff in there, but part of the reason why we're recommending that you read the book is because you have to get to the root of the issue to understand what the issue is first. And then you take the necessary steps and move forward to fix it. But you got to know what the issue is. A lot of people don't know what the underlying issue is right now. And so they're doing stuff and they're throwing stuff at the situation, everything, including the kitchen sink, trying to figure that thing out and trying to see what sticks, but they're not dealing with the issue. It's the same thing that people do when they go to the doctor. You know, when you go to the doctor's going to say, well, what are your symptoms? That's the first question that they ask you. What are your symptoms? And so you're going to sit there and say, oh man, doctor, you know, my shoulder's hurting. And I don't know why, you know, why it's feeling like that. Okay, here's some painkillers and they'll send you on about your way. But they're not dealing with the underlying issue of your condition. They're literally just treating the symptoms. So that analogy spills over into the secure party creditor, state national, American national space, because a lot of people still to this day, even after years of studying, they don't understand the underlying issue. That's why we want you to read that book. It's going to help you get to the root of the problem. But you still got to figure out, how do I get out of this? And that's where we come in. Gail?
When you look at these contracts, I'm kind of looking at the contracts that, you know, we've all dealt with. You know, we kind of want to look at that aspect a little bit deeper as well, to understand when we say that the benefit is not there for you, the benefit is there for the other party to the contract, whether it's the driver's license, the state, and the BC. You know, you look at these car loans, auto loans, contracts with cell phone companies, everything structured on these contracts is for their benefit. Like an auto loan, you're assigning a title or the ownership of the title to the lender, not the buyer.
Right.
And you don't realize that's happening. You are authorizing repossession without a court order for any default. You're authorizing this. And anything else that they want to add to the contract, you just want the benefit of driving the vehicle. Well, I tell everybody the money is in the contract, not the vehicle. The vehicle to me is like a perk. If you go to a gym, they give you some towels. Okay. The car is like the towel. It is a perk. The money is the contract. Even in a gym membership, where's the money? In the contract. The contract is a security as well. So you're signing away your rights as the equitable owner when you sign the paperwork. If you want to purchase a house, if you want to purchase a vehicle, whatever it is, you are actually signing away your equitable right. You're consenting to be treated as something that you're not. You're supposed to be the head, or you're supposed to be the creditor, but you are consenting to be the debtor in the contract agreement. That is by default. And then you go back and you want to complain about this and that and the other and so forth, and that's what people are doing out here. After you done sign all the paperwork, giving them the authority, the rights to everything, signing away all the value, you come back later and say, hey, hold on, wait. You know, this is fraud. This is the word that people are using out here in social media. It's fraud. But didn't you sign? Because the judge will ask you, didn't you sign?
Yeah.
And because you cannot lie, you signed, you put a signature down there. Now, true, it's not the correct signature. It's a blank endorsement, but you still gave them something, and you put something on that dotted line, on that signature line, that allowed them to move forward, retain ownership by the lender, not the buyer. You stepped into that debtor position. You agreed to this, you know, and now you're ready to say it's not fair. Someone has to teach us about contracts, the ones with signatures and the invisible contracts as well. Someone has to teach the people. It may be you teaching the people what they need to know so they don't continue to get in these contracts
Right.
and lose. So when you look at these contracts, like I said, it doesn't matter what type of contract it is. It's all structured to benefit the other party, not you. You know, my godfather told me a long time ago, the big print giveth, but the fine print taketh away.
That's
The
profound.
big print giveth, but the fine print taketh away. And because you don't pay attention to the fine print, you can literally lose everything in these contracts. And you literally are. When you think about what you are losing as opposed to what you have gained, it's 100 times more that you have lost as opposed to what you have gained. And you continue to lose your entire life until you step off of the citizenship with all power and authority.
Right. And
And
here's the
until
thing.
you can do that,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
until you do that, you will forever be financially oppressed. What were you going to say, Danica?
I was going to say, we're not out here trying to, create discord and to lead any sort of revolt or, you know, um, convince people into like an anti-government posture. No. We're teaching people how to conduct their business the right way in a peaceful manner, non-combative, with clean hands. And you just have to know that the citizenship is something that can be used as a tool to do business, right? But it's not something that you're proclaiming yourself to be in terms of your identity, but essentially it is something that you have to control, and you have to separate yourself from it, control it, and utilize it as a tool to do business, because you still have to do commerce. So we're not telling people to go and renounce citizenship, and no, we're not telling anybody to do any of that. I just wanted to make that clear. But you do have to understand the core hidden clauses that's associated with the citizenship by participation. You consent to, if there is no separation, if there's no separation between the living soul and the citizenship, by participation, you consent to the jurisdiction and that, that conditional ownership that we were talking about earlier, and the registration and the consideration and the acceptance, right? Everything else flows from the top down, from the United States citizenship down into other areas of your life. So you just have to know how to deal with those legal presumptions and how to place the proper separation on paper so that you are protected and that you are not presumed to be a part of this invisible contract. So this has to be, strategically put together for you so that you can operate in the right way. But operating directly under that citizenship without properly controlling it, that's not what you want to do. You want to let them know that you're just coming as a businessman or woman to correct the record. That's really why you're here.
Correct. And, the citizenship is something you need to learn how to control.
Yeah.
And you need to learn, if you are controlling the citizenship, from what position are you controlling the citizenship? Yeah. Now, we didn't go into what position you're in when you are controlling the citizenship, but that's very important. There is a scripture, Matthew 12:37. It says, "By thy words thou shalt be justified, and by thy words thou shalt be condemned." It's going to be very important for you to understand those words, the words that you're going to be using. And I look at that and I say, okay, I can look at that from a signature as well. By the words for your signature, thou shalt be justified. But at the same time, if you don't understand how important a signature is, the same signature, not the same signature, but another signature, I'll use that word, another signature can condemn you, can place you in a position of a debtor. Two different signatures. One can justify you, and another signature can condemn you and place you in a debtor position. Two different signatures. One is one status, and another is a separate, different status. Signature is very important. If you don't understand that, because a lot of these contracts that actually require a signature, you are giving them a signature that condemns you, that places you in the position of a debtor. And you don't want to continue to move in that direction your entire life. You want to understand how important the signature is. And then, of course, you start to understand what needs to be done when it comes to the invisible contracts as well. There is a process. There are steps to address the invisible contracts, just like there are steps to address the signature contracts. Right. That's something that everybody, in a network, that's something that they learn. And they go through the steps to address those contracts.
That's right. That's right. There is a process that one has to undergo, and there's a step-by-step protocol that one needs to follow, but one would have to have enough information to know how to rebut those existing contracts, and then also how to properly rescind any paperwork that you would have submitted out there in the public that can be deemed as confusing or conflicting information as to who you asserted yourself to be, even a year ago, as opposed to who you are now by way of the new information and light that you're receiving by being on calls such as this. So it is a process. Everything has to come under the microscope so that you can deal with the root cause issue and know how to properly separate without damaging yourself. There's a lot of work to do, and this is why we're here, is to help people gain an understanding and to pull people into conversation so that they are not fearful and moving forward. They have enough information to say, okay, this is what I know I need to do, but the real conversations are happening inside of the private network.
Correct. And I just want to mention wrong signature equals wrong status, which equals economic loss. Look at it as an economic loss. If you don't have the right status, you don't know the right signature. That's an economic loss. And that's what's been happening to everyone their entire life, and they did not realize it. It's that important.
It is.
So your signature places you in position for an equitable claim. It should place you in a situation where you have an equitable claim and you can claim the interest that's also owed to you as well.
Mm-hmm.
There's a few other things that we could definitely discuss. I know our time is kind of winding up. Understanding contract law is going to be very important. When it comes to a contract, you got to read every line. And arbitration, dispute, jurisdiction, clauses, everything. Any addendums, you have to read and understand. If you don't understand, don't sign.
Right.
If you do sign with capacity. Know who you are, because that's very important. That's where it all starts, right there with that signature. Always request full disclosure regarding everything, any security agreements, funding sources. You want to know everything.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be afraid to ask the questions that most people will never ask because they're too timid. They're too nervous. They're fearful. If I ask, then I won't get what I want out of it, which is the home, which is the vehicle. You cannot allow yourself to be manipulated from that perspective. Record, retain all information. If you need to communicate under some type of affidavit. Make sure that you have detailed records of this transaction, and don't throw that information away. I used to keep everything just because I don't know what to do with it, but I know I need to keep it, and I would keep it, and it might be 10 years old, documents from a contract, but I would keep it and had all this paperwork. And something just told me, hold on to it. But then when you get to around certain people, they'll say, why are you keeping all this or hoarding all of this? Throw it away. Because they don't know how important that paperwork is. That paperwork, those contracts, are securities. And if you throw it away, then you've lost all the interest that's actually owed to you. So I know sometimes you have people saying you need to throw these 3 boxes of paperwork, just throw it away. And yet it's all contracts in these boxes of paperwork that you have in the back of the closet. Now it's time to pull it out to see exactly what's going on with these contracts. You got to know what to do with the contract. It is a security instrument as well. Just keep that in mind. It is a security instrument.
That, in addition to the receipts that you get at the store. Y'all need to start keeping your receipts. You need to start keeping your receipts. Start keeping those receipts and start making a proper reporting. It's a lot of stuff that you can do. I would definitely be holding on to my receipts as well. You may not have a contract with Walmart, but you got a receipt. And more than likely, in a 12-month time frame, you have spent more than $600 at Walmart. Hint, hint. Hold on to your receipts. Like I said, people just have to learn how to properly conduct business. That's it.
Yes. They really do.
Yeah, so this was a good conversation, Mikhail. Thank you. And I'm thankful for all of the participants that are listening in, whether you're on TikTok or YouTube. We do appreciate your time because we know that you could be somewhere else instead of sitting on a call with us. All right, so we do thank you for your time. So you all are going to want to connect with us. Definitely want to subscribe to the channel. You want to go ahead and follow the TikTok page. And go ahead and send us a direct message, a DM, if you have any questions regarding the broadcast that you've heard this evening. All right, we will be back again with another topic next week. I think we're supposed to be back next week. I think. But yeah, so this was good. I'm happy that you all have been able to join. Thank you to those of you that are actually on the Zoom with us. We appreciate your time. So any final thoughts, questions, comments before we close?
I will say one thing. My final comment is this. Keep this in mind. Contracts are covenants. If you enter into them blindly, you bind yourself spiritually and legally.